June 28, 1919. The great powers assembled to formally end the protracted four-year war. The result is the Treaty of Versailles, the peace settlement that would shape the fragile interwar order linking the two world wars. There were many clauses: reparations, military restrictions, territorial losses, and union limitations, but there was only one provision that would be especially important. It was hidden within Article 231 of the Treaty of Versailles. Article 231, later known as the War Guilt Clause, occupies only a few lines within a treaty of more than 400 articles. Yet in ways few of its drafters anticipated, it contributed to the political climate that would later make another war possible. Today, it's remembered as the provision that forced Germany to accept responsibility for the catastrophe of the Great War. In Germany, it came to symbolize national humiliation and became a potent rhetorical weapon for radical nationalists. Although framed in legal language establishing liability for reparations, the clause carried profound moral implications, especially in the eyes of a defeated nation. To understand how a piece of legal drafting became one of the most controversial elements of the post-war settlement, we must return to Paris in 1919. The negotiations were deeply divided. On one side stood the American President Woodrow Wilson, who rejected punitive indemnities and insisted that Germany should pay for civilian damages rather than the full cost of the war. On the other stood French and British publics, who had been promised that Germany would pay extensively for the destruction it had caused. Many demanded that the defeated power bear the full financial burden of the conflict. The gap between these positions was immense. The Allied leaders needed a formula capable of reconciling legal principle with political expectation. Among the American delegates working on reparations were legal advisors such as John Foster Dulles and financial experts including Norman H. Davis. They contributed to the legal framework anchoring the reparations section of the treaty, a compromise intended to reconcile conflicting Allied demands. Article 231 established Germany's responsibility for the damage caused by the war. It was followed by Article 232, which limited Germany's obligation in practice to civilian damages and acknowledged that payments would depend on Germany's capacity to pay. The total sum itself was not fixed until 1921, when it was set at 132 billion gold marks, though the actual payments made were substantially lower and later revised. The language, however, did not remain confined to legal interpretation. When the clause was received in Germany, its meaning hardened. What the Allies framed as legal responsibility was widely understood in German political debate as a declaration that Germany had been the author of the war. It became known as the Schuldartikel, the guilt article. The reaction in Berlin was visceral. Germany was still suffering from blockade, political upheaval and economic dislocation. Many Germans saw the clause not as a financial mechanism but as a demand to sacrifice national honor. The sense of humiliation proved politically unifying across ideological lines. Monarchists, liberals and socialists who agreed on little else condemned the provision. Philipp Scheidemann, the first Chancellor of the new Republic, resigned rather than sign the treaty, declaring before the National Assembly, "What hand would not wither that binds itself and us in these chains?" Ultimately, the German government signed under the threat of renewed Allied military advance. Article 231 did not create the stab-in-the-back myth. That narrative had already been promoted by military leaders in late 1918. But it gave the myth powerful reinforcement. The claim that Germany had been betrayed by civilian politicians seemed to many confirmed by the treaty's language. By linking the reparations system to a clause widely interpreted as an admission of guilt, the Allies made enforcement politically combustible. Enforcement became fraught with resentment, while efforts at revision were interpreted very differently in Berlin and Paris. Throughout the 1920s, attempts to stabilize the system through measures such as the Dawes Plan and later the Young Plan revealed how politically fragile the arrangement had become. No one exploited this grievance more effectively than Adolf Hitler. Rather than debating exchange rates or coal deliveries, he pointed to what he called the war guilt lie. He framed the leaders of the Weimar Republic as the November criminals who had accepted humiliation and dishonor. In doing so, he transformed a legal clause into a symbol of national betrayal and used it to delegitimize the entire post-war international order. The clause's impact extended beyond Germany. By the 1930s, a growing number of British historians and politicians questioned whether the allocation of responsibility for the war had been too one-sided. Doubts about the fairness of Versailles weakened political resolve to enforce its terms, one of several factors that later shaped the policy of appeasement. Article 231 was drafted to establish liability. It was meant to define a financial obligation within a complex peace settlement. Instead, in Germany it became a political symbol, one that destabilized a fragile republic, provided nationalists with a lasting rallying cry, and helped pave the road toward a second, far more terrible conflict in Europe.